program is dedicated in memory of Daniel ben David and Limud bat Avraham Strauss and Mordechai ben Moshe and Rezel bat Yosef Meir Marcus, Zichronam Livracha, parents of Judy and Menachem Marcus. And our share is throughout the year, as was last year, Elisheva Sima bat Zalman from the Friss family. We thank Hallie for and husband for the contribution. Okay. Today, it's not going to be the Siddur, and it's not going to be the Zmirot. It's going to be something very close to my academic heart, the Rambam. The Rambam was a poet? Where do we see that the Rambam wrote poetry? Rambam wrote halachot. The Rambam wrote in his lifetime about 40 books, of which most of them were not part of his Torah library. You got that one? They were either medicine, medical digests. You want to know about nutrition? Read the Rambam. He's going to tell you what to eat and what not to eat. And it's pretty good, even in terms of modern medicine. There was a very, very well-known doctor, Fred Rosner, Zichron Livrocha, who published medical books together, medical halachic books, or medical ethics, with Rabbi Tendler, Zichron Livrocha. They were a great tag team. And Dr. Rosner put out a book on the Rambam and his medical writings, demonstrating that 50% of what the Rambam wrote was 100% medically accurate today, and another 25% looked good. It wasn't 100%, but looked good. That means 75% of what the Rambam wrote 850 years ago was medically sound today against modern medicine. That's unbelievable when you think about it. So he wrote things about food and diet and so on, digestion, sleep. He's all about sleep. And he didn't listen to his own message. He said you should sleep 8 hours a night. He slept 4 hours a night. And he had 20 effective hours that he could account for. No waste of time there in his 20 hours of being awake. But he says himself he slept only 4 hours. But he recommended 8 hours of sleep for a normal person. The Rambam believed that preventive medicine is the best medicine. Some say he stole the idea from Aristotle. But say that so Aristotle said it before it also. And it's not out of sync that the Rambam has it from Aristotle, but he believed that it was absolutely true. Why have a person get sick and then start worrying about curing him? Let's try to prevent him from getting sick. And he believed that nutrition was one of the keys to proper health. So Rambam writes these books on science and on philosophy and so on. So the halachic books are the minority of his, the Torah-oriented books are the minority of his 40 books, except that the Rambam believed that studying philosophy was also Torah. And the Rambam believed that studying medicine was also Torah. So the Rambam didn't think in terms of mavdil ben kodesh lechol, between Kodesh and the secular. Rambam didn't believe that any of the studies were secular. He believed in Mavdil ben Kodesh leKodesh. We say that on Motzei Shabbat when Sunday is Yom Tov. So we say Mavdil ben Kodesh leKodesh. And I love that. So in my yeshiva in Chashmonaim, so we have like all schools, Jewish studies in the morning, Torah studies in the morning, and in the afternoon you have general studies. So a lot of places they call them Limudei Chol, secular. We had the Limudei Kodesh in the afternoon. That was math, and that was science, and history, and geography, and language. In the morning, it was Limudei Kodesh Kodashim. It was the Holy of Holies. So there we learned Mishnah and Gemara and Machshavit Yisrael and Tanakh and so on. So that was the Havdalah. V'hivdilah ben HaKodesh u'ben HaKodesh Kodashim. It says in the Mishkan that divided between the Kodesh, one section of the Mishkan, and the Kodesh Kodashim. So that kind of Havdalah, in accordance with the Rambam, we could tolerate. There was such a Havdalah. But there's nothing essentially chol, because the Rambam believed that the study of the sciences is an integral part of the mitzvah of knowing HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Hashem Elokecha, and therefore it's not only is it not bitul Torah, waste of time, but it's actually a mitzvah to study this. And look, I was indoctrinated by Rabbi Tendler because I actually never had a schut of being in a shir in the yeshiva, but he was my biology Rebbe. I have no other word to describe my relationship to Rabbi Tendler, my biology Rebbe. We learned so much time. You had to make a birkat Torah before you walked into that shir of biology. I'm telling you, it was like unbelievable. And I'll just say in his memory that he once, in a lab situation where we were under microscope, we had to draw pictures of cells. We were doing cellular biology. And everybody had their pencils and drawing their, what we call in this country, kishkushaya, just we didn't know what we were drawing. And he was coming around, he said, no, you missed something. And finally you look again, you do a few more lines, a few more dots. And finally at the end he goes, and the Rabbeinu Shalom you didn't see. I mean, you're looking at a microscope, you're looking at the DNA, the fundamentals of life, and you didn't see HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You guys are blind. Wait, did he yell at us? He yelled at us, mamish. I'm telling you, I'll never forget that lesson. That was a great lesson. My biology Rebbe, Rabbi Tendler, Sipron Lebracha. So so Rambam wrote poetry as well. Yeah.
Rabbi Tendler was also a researcher. He worked very hard and very long hours
In cancer research. I know that. In the in the 60s. Yeah, in the 60s. He was actually going to finish it here in Bar Ilan University in 1969, but said the rest is history. He didn't come. But the Rambam, like all the other greats, poetry to them was like writing prose. You grow up, you learn how to write, so you learn how to write. But in Spain, in the Middle Ages, you learned how to write poetry also. And to write poetry, on the levels of the Ibn Ezra and Yudah Levi and so on, you had to be a total expert in Tanakh, in the linguistics of Tanakh, because you're going to play with the words, and also style, of course, and Midrashei Chazal. You have to know how Chazal used some of these words, and you play on that too, and then you put it together as a poem. So we do not have poetry of the Rambam, but here and there, he writes a poem. So in his introduction to his first major work, it's not his first work, but his first major work, and he's 23 years old, is Rambam's commentary to the Mishnah, Pirush HaMishnah. Pirush HaMishnah, sometimes known erroneously as Pirush HaMishnayis. That's how they'll say it in the yeshiva world, and that's only because in the Vilna Shas they erroneously called it Pirush HaMishnayot. And it's between the Rosh and the Marsha in the back of the Gemara. You need to squint or you have to have reading glasses, and it's in Rashi print, and there are many print errors. Don't even bother with that. Today we have Rav Kapach, who is the great Yemenite Dayan, who published 1963 to 1967 a new translation of the Rambam's Pirush HaMishnah. Why translation? Because he didn't write it in Hebrew. He wrote it in his Yiddish, but his Yiddish was Judeo-Arabic. In Judeo-Arabic, which means it's Hebrew letters, it's Aleph Bet, but it's Arabic. It's literary Arabic. As a matter of fact, I even have a page. This is the Rambam's handwriting. It's Rambam's handwriting of Judeo-Arabic, of a page from his Pirush on Masechet Brachot, as opposed to the Mishneh Torah that he wrote in Hebrew. So obviously, if you write in Hebrew, it's going to be a lot easier for us than to read something in translation. But the poem that he wrote before the translation is in Hebrew, and that's what we're going to do right now. So you take a look on top. It's two poems. The first poem is the first 10 lines that we have here. Is it 10 lines? And then afterwards, it says, Haktamata Rambam LeMishnah. He writes another poem, where in the poem itself, he's going to market the book. He's going to market the book. And I always wondered, when does a person write an introduction? Do you write the introduction when you finish a book, or you write the introduction when you're starting to write the book? And it's interesting. I guess the answer is, depends which book. But many, many authors will write the introduction when they finish the book. Because in the introduction, they're telling the readers what they did in the book, what they're planning to do, the program of the book. And the reason they do it at the end, because sometimes in the midst of one's writing, you change course. So then you'd have to change the whole introduction. The introductions usually are written at the end of the book, and then you put the book out and so on. It's very likely that the Rambam wrote these poems, at least the second poem, at the end of his writing of the book. But the first poem sounds like it's an introduction to the introduction. It's written pretty early. So he's now 23 years old. And he writes as follows: Sefer Asher Chubar Bidin Moshe. The book that was written in the halachot of Moshe. Which book was written in the halachot of Moshe? The Torah. The Torah. The Torah. It's a nice way of saying the Torah. But he's actually referring to the Mishnah. Because the Mishnah talks about the dinim of Moshe Rabbeinu. The dinim, the halachot of the Torah, was compiled in the book called the Mishnah. Mishnah was compiled in the 3rd century, edited by Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the very end of the period of the Tanaim. It was wrong that we were taught that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi wrote the Mishnah. Now, he may have written physically, but composed the Mishnah. The word editor is much more accurate because Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi himself uses material that predates himself. So there's no question that he's got material on the table and he's putting it together, and the editorial job is what makes the Mishnah the sacred Mishnah that it is, and that is what he leaves out is important. Because what Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi is trying to put into the Mishnah is those areas of halakha that are relevant for halakha, the bottom line. He's going to tell us sometimes what the halakha should be, in spite of the fact that he sometimes will bring variant opinions. And when he brings variant opinions, you somehow can figure out what his opinion really was. For example, if there's a dispute between Chachamim and somebody, no matter who the somebody is, we'll say Rabbi Yehuda, one of the Tanaim, not Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, somebody earlier. As we have Rabbi Yehuda saying this and Chachamim arguing, you pretty much know the halakha is in accordance with the Chachamim, because the majority rules. The majority rules. Yachid v'rabim, halakha k'rabim. And the only question is, why did he put the variant opinion in, the alternate opinion into the Mishnah? Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi himself actually explains why he does it. The Rambam elaborates on this to teach us that the opinion that was not in accordance with halakha is also halakha in a crisis moment. Which means sometimes a posek has to be armed with variant opinions, because in a particular shaila, in a particular case, he's going to have to rely on an opinion that has halakhic validity, although it's not the mainstream. But in an emergency case, in a crisis moment, the posek has the right, the halakhic right, to say, okay, I'm going to rely on this opinion and tell you, yes, you can do such and such. Give an example. The examples are actually so numerous that I'm going to have to, they just, one case where you would rely on an opinion that, that normally we would say, don't do it. But in a special circumstances, look, you might think in the world of kashrut, because in kashrut, you have different opinions on so many different matters, and you might be in a situation where the mainstream halakha says such and such, but now a person is caught in a scenario where he's going to have to rely on a view that's generally not according to halakha, so as to say yes, because if he doesn't say yes, it's going to incur major financial loss or major ogmat nefesh. Somebody's going to really blank out and have a real problem with this. The local Rav has authority occasionally to use whatever view that he has at his disposal, sometimes to tailor make a psak halacha that's going to work for a particular person. Yeah.
What about the case of Kamsa Bar Kamsa, putting the mum? And some rabbis say that the one who paskin that they should not sacrifice, the one with the woman, and
Okay, so there the issue is actually the flip side, that they were using the halakha, and the halakha caused an absolute calamity.
Right.
So somebody should have thought differently at the time. Somebody should have thought differently. I would say that our Rabbi, the Rav Zechron Livracha, was a genius in use the word to create, to not just create, but to put together a psak halacha that would incorporate whatever views that we may have in order to allow. You want something? I mean, something that, don't quote me now for halacha l'maaseh, but I can tell you that 1940s the Rav was faced with the issue of all kinds of makeup for women on Shabbat, and he was faced with a situation that women were coming to shul made up with everything, with a lipstick and this and that. This was a reality. And the Rav and he knew that some of the applications of what was problematic. He knew that. But what he had to do was somehow soften the blow and somehow redefine some of the things that would be considered biblical violations on Shabbat and make them only rabbinic because of circumstances. If you do it with a shinu, you do it a little change and it reduces the charge, and then to introduce all kinds of things like kvod habriot, a woman doesn't feel that she's, looks proper coming to shul, and we put all this into the shissel. And we'll come up with a psak halacha that he wasn't saying, hey, you can do this. He was saying that if this is what's being done, it's not the end of the world. So there's a way that he would market those kind of piskei halacha by doing it. I call it halachic engineering. And he was a genius in doing that. But he would be able to put together all different types of views and say, well, you can rely on this and you can rely on that and so on. There's a shita that says psik reisha de lo nichale, that if I do something and something automatically happens, but I'm not interested that secondary thing happens, so everybody says it's a rabbinic prohibition. You still can't do it. But there are but one of the Rishonim says that it's mutar, you're allowed to do it lechatchila. And that's a shita that sometimes the poskim will rely on in a crisis moment. So it's good to know all the alternate views out there. So just because the Mishnah has a view that's not lehalacha doesn't mean it's in the geniza, it's been tossed out. It's not tossed out at all. So, and that's the case for all the world, the history of psak. So let's get back to the poem. Sefer Asher Chubar B'din Moshe, the book that was written, composed with the law of Moshe Rabbeinu, which means he's talking about the Mishnah now. Be'ur halachotav b'dat tzidko, and to explain the halachot, and the religious, the right way. Tzedek means the correct way of the halakha. Kidat Asher he'etik zekenenu. He's not only talking about the Mishnah, he's talking about, I am going to explain that book. What I'm doing in this book, Pirush HaMishnah, there's a book called the Mishnah, and I'm going to come and explain to you the correct way of understanding the halachot, kedat, the way in modern Hebrew we say the religion, but the way the halakha was brought down, was copied by our zikenenu, my zikenim. Who are my zikenim? Who are they? Where did I get this from? Rambam is saying, I'm not starting from a vacuum. I have background. Now, at the very end of the Mishnah commentary, the Rambam says, Ani Moshe ben Maimon ben, gives us 10 generations. 10 generations of his own family who were illustrious people in their own right. I mean, each one, the Rambam outshined them at the end of the day, but Rabbeinu Maimon in Spain was regarded as top. As absolutely top, and known in the city that he lived in Spain, and so on. But some want to suggest that the Rambam is intimating that he's actually a descendant of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. Now, this is going to be very hard to prove, very, very hard to prove, but it's been suggested that he actually comes from that generation. I don't remember exactly how this was built at, but if you look at the word Zikenenu, it's spelt wrong. There's a yud after the kuf. Right. And that yud shouldn't be there. Rav Kapach points out, and another who edited the poem, Rav Shilat, that in the manuscript that we have this poem, the Rambam wrote that yud, which means it's not an accident. And it's there, he's dropping a hint for something. And someone to suggest, I don't remember exactly how that came about, that he wants to suggest that it's not just his grandfather or great-grandfather, but he's talking about somebody who really goes way back, and maybe even to the days of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Maybe. But he's definitely lauding his forefathers who taught him. The Rambam was taught by his father. He was homeschooled by Rabbeinu Maimon. Bonav asher hem chizku bitko. They built something. They built a structure, which the phrase lechazek bitko means, it's used by the Rambam himself later on in life, where he writes about Mashiach. He says, Im Yamod, I'm quoting now from the 11th chapter of L'chot Melachim, which is the very, very end of the Mishneh Torah, where he talks about Mashiach. And he says, Im Yamod melech bibeit David, if somebody from the Davidic line arises, Hogeh b'Torah is knowledgeable, well knowledgeable in Torah, Osek b'mitzvot ki David aviv, and is involved in mitzvah performance like his forefather David, Kifi Torah shebechtav v'Torah shebal peh, both in the written law and the oral law, V'yachov kol Yisrael lelech ba, and he's influential on Am Yisrael to follow in this path, Ulechazek bidka. It was a phrase that I had a little difficulty trying to figure out what the Rambam actually meant, but Rabbeinu Google helped me a little bit, that in the context of a pasuk in Yeshayahu, it actually meant observance. That the Melech HaMashiach is going to not only be somebody who's going to succeed in spreading Torah, but he's also going to spread mitzvah observance by the people. And having seen that, I came back to the poem here. Bonav. They built something. Ashehem chisku. It was fortified that the observance of Torah is going to be accomplished by this book. Chibur, a compilation. Who's writing it? Shval koach tzair shanim. Somebody who's weak and young in years. He's talking about himself. This is autobiographical. Rambam is 23 years old at the time. And he says, who am I? Who am I? Against all the greats. Who am I? Moshe beno Maimon. Moshe, the son of Maimon. Asher tzarku el, who calls out to God, liyasher et netivato, to straighten my path, which means the Rambam is offering a tefillah to Kadosh Baruch Hu that I don't go off the derech. Now, not in the modern sense, they didn't become religious. Today you say that off the derech. The derech of the exact way of understanding Torah. There is a path. Et derech asher yelchu ba in Parshat Yitro. And Chazal say this is where the word halacha comes from. It's the road that we've traveled all the years. And you can go off that road by misunderstanding something in halacha. The Rambam says if you don't comprehend halacha properly, you're off the road. And he's asking Kadosh Baruch Hu for divine help and guidance. Now we know that there's a tefillah of Rav Nechunya ben Hakaneh. It says Hanichnas lebeit midrash. When you go into the Beit Midrash, you should say Yiratzon. It's a tefillah, and among other things, says Shelo ekashel b'dvar halacha. I shouldn't stumble. I just say the right thing in halacha. I once asked the Rav, and I wrote this in my book. If every yeshiva bacher in the morning has to say this tefillah, the Rav said it's not meant for yeshiva bacherim. So yeshiva bacher, if he has a head, he'll understand the Tosfot, he'll understand the Rambam. You can say the tefillah 100 times. If he doesn't have a head, he's not going to understand anything. That's what but he said it was meant for people who are posek halacha. They need special divine guidance to guide them to, especially in these unique private questions where perhaps not all the personal information is given over to the posek, but that information is actually essential, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should somehow guide the posek around. And here you see that the Rambam, as a young person, 23 years old, is asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu to guide him on the path, to God. Asher tza'ako, tza'aka means a type of tefillah. I scream to God to liasher et netivato, lasum betorato levad cheshko, to have his Torah not only stand by side his desire, he's got this tremendous desire, but also the desire is his, but what does he need God for? Linpol chavalim lo behar hambin. Bin here means bina, understanding. He needs climbing the mountain of understanding. Linpol chavalim is if you're a mountain climber, so you attach ropes to help you pull yourself up the mountain. He's asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu to pull out the ropes to allow him to climb the mountain of Bina. We're saying this in poetic way. So the word Bina is not there, it's Bin, Har Ha-Bin, the mountain of understanding. Lechol Pri, and I have a typo here, it's Chochma. There's a hey instead of a bet at the end of the word Chochma. Lechol Pri Chochma Livad Chuko. We actually had that phrase in the Zmirot, Lechem Chukim, Basar Vidagim, B'chol Matayimim. Lechem Chukim means basic nourishment, as opposed to supplementary, right? On Shabbat, we have the lechem chukim and extras, basar v'dagim v'chol matamim. That's what we were doing these mirot. So here the Rambam is using that, lechol pri chochma, livad chuko, not just the basics, but I want to get everything. I want the bina and I want the chochma. And what's the difference between bina and chochma? So chochma is the intelligence to retain material. That in your mind, you become an encyclopedia. Bina is analysis. That you have all these different pieces of information, and now you want to put it together and show what Chazal call lomed davar mitoch davar, to learn something from and to extrapolate it from something else. That's called Bina. There's actually a third level, and that's called De'ah, and De'ah means practical application. And that is to take the theoretical knowledge, now apply it to Mr. So-and-so, and so beseda. So you have here, the Rambam is asking for Chokhmah and Bina, just as we do in our tefillah daily. Chonenu miyitcha, if you daven nusach Sfard, Chokhmah, Bina, Vadat, and if you daven Ashkenaz, it's De'ah, Bina, Vaskel. So Askel is Chokhmah, by the way. It's just a synonym of Chokhmah. And Chokhmah, Bina, Vadat are the abbreviation of Chabad. That's why the organization was called that, because of the higher 3 concentric circles above the 7 sfirot, which were Chokhmah, Bina, and Dat. Az yechazeh tuv el, then if I'm gifted, Rambam saying, if I'm gifted with the ability of understanding and wisdom, coupled with my great desire to do this, to put together such a compendium to explain the Mishnah so that everybody is going to know what to do, which means the Rambam actually believed that there's going to be halachic value by writing this parush, even though he goes on later in life and he does something even more extravagant, the Mishneh Torah, but at least at this stage, he definitely feels that he wants to bring things to a bottom line. What is the halakha? He's going to tell us in every single machloket, he's going to tell us what is the halakha. And there are those out there, some scholars, who thought that the Rambam in the Mishnah commentary never concerned himself with halakha, were outright wrong. They were pashut wrong, because the Rambam, when he made changes in his own halachic psak, he went back to the Mishnah commentary and made the changes, not even so subtle changes, but very, very obvious changes, and the Rambam was honest. So now he says, after all said and done, then when this is going to be complete, Yechezeh tuv el, what's going to be apparent, word chozeh, vision, everybody's going to be able to see it. It's going to be obvious, the greatness of God. That's one uz. And uz yismach Moshe biyofi matnat chilko. You're going to see what I put together here. Is it me or is it Moshe Rabbeinu he's talking about? Or both. Or both. That comes from davening on Shabbos morning. Yismach Moshe b'matnat chilko. He cut and pasted it from Shachris on Shabbat and so on. It's an unbelievable statement. Now, just to be honest, the word biyofi in this line, az yismach Moshe biyofi matnat chalko, all three, and I mean Rav Kapach, Rav Shilat, and there's a Rabinowitz, but I'm not talking about Nocham Rabinowitz, I'm talking about Professor Dov Rabinowitz, who published for the series called Rambam La'am, the introductions of the Rambam. So they all have comments that in the manuscript of the Rambam itself, it's a little bit fudgy. It's not clear what the word is, but Rav Shilat suggested something else. Rav Kapach went with this, and biyofi matnat chelko. But it's not terribly critical. But what you do see is he's saying at the end, va'az yismach Moshe biyofi matnat chelko. Moshe Rabbeinu is going to be very proud of me, what I'm doing here, or he, or both. You're never going to know. Who did you mean by this? And I'm wondering if the Rambam prophetically sees himself as some type of spiritual extension to Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, not long after the Rambam dies, it was already said about him, Mi Moshe ad Moshe lo kam ke Moshe. Rambam never authored that phrase. It was said after the Rambam died, but it didn't take 500 years. Rabbi Twersky, the Rav son-in-law, in his one of his articles, writes that already in the 13th century, Rambam dies in 1204. And if you want to know why I'm doing this today, because tomorrow night is the Rambam's yahrzeit. It's the 20th of Tevet. And he died in 1204. So at the beginning of the 13th century, in southern France, where the Rambam was extremely popular, it was already said about him, Mi Moshe ad Moshe lo kam ke Moshe, which meant from Moshe Rabbeinu until today, we haven't had anyone as great.
On the cover of the Ramah, it says the same thing.
So you're stealing the show. Are you going to tell me that it was also said about Moshe Mendelssohn, and it was also said about the Chatam Sofer? Once it took off. Once it was there, so those who've been to Krakow, behind the Ramah Shul, in the cemetery where the Ramah himself is buried, there's a whole beautiful poem there, and one of the lines is, Mi Moshe ad Moshe lo kam ke Moshe bi Yisrael. Every line of that poem ends with bi Yisrael, because the Ramah's father was Yisrael, Israelite. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So so the idea was from the Rambam until the Ramah, Rabbi Moshe Isserles, no one was as great as the Ramah. So that's a secondary usage of Mi Moshe ad Moshe lo kam ke Moshe. But the original was about Moshe Rabbeinu and the Rambam. Now, the Rambam was called Moshe. Why? So if you look at those 10 generations, there's no Moshe there. Rambam wasn't named after a Zayda, a grandfather. There were those who wanted to say that from Moshe Rabbeinu until the Rambam, nobody even used the name Moshe as a name, as a first name. Not true. Not true. You see, you got to be careful. You have to be careful when you make those kind of statements. Yeah?
It might actually be maybe a grandfather on his mother's side, because Ben would be on his father's side.
I thought of that, but when the Rambam talks about Yichus, the mother side doesn't come into play. Okay. So I didn't want to raise that sensitive issue here. But, okay. But in the Igeret Rav Shmira Gaon, the father of Rav Hai Gaon, end of 9th century, he's got the whole listing of all the Geonim from the 6th to the 10th century. Geonim doesn't mean great Lamdanim. Some were. But it simply means he was the president of the yeshiva in Baghdad, president of the Yeshiva University. The president, he was the Rosh Yeshiva. Now, the Rosh Yeshiva could have been an outstanding Talmid Chacham, and many were outstanding Talmidei Chachamim, like Rav Saadia Gaon, like Rav Hai Gaon, like his father Rav Shira Gaon, like Rav Yehudai Gaon. You can name them. Who were the greats? And some were administrators. Administrators, right? The Yeshiva University. It was a very fine president of Yeshiva University who was neither a rabbi nor a doctor, Mr. Richard Joel, and he did a nice job what he did and so on. But traditionally, there was Rav, Dov Revel. He was a gadol, an absolute great Talmud Chacham. Dr. Belkin was an unbelievable Talmud Chacham. Rabbi Lamb was a serious Jewish scholar, and so on. And there was Mr. So, beseder, that happened in the days of the Gaonim. The term Gaon was the title. So, it only was in the modern age that somebody who was an luminary, an outstanding luminary, got the title Gaon. And it was given to the Gaon from Vilna. Why? They wanted to say that he's a historic misfit. He's in the 18th century, in the end of the 18th century, but he belongs 100 years, 1,000 years ago. He belongs with the greats, so he's the Gaon. And today, as Rav Yosef said, the term has been eroded and watered down so that every Moshe Chaim is a Rav Goin. So it doesn't mean anything anymore. It doesn't mean anything. Mamash, today, anybody, Rav Goin? So, okay. You're also a Rav Goin. I mean, I was once at a wedding with Rav Mital sitting there, and every guy who was getting a bracha was a Rav Goin, a Rav Goin, a Rav Goin. And Rav Mital said, I didn't know we're back in the period of the Goinim. Everybody's a Goin. It's... Beseder. So the Rambam was, we know from a letter of his grandson that he was born on Erev Pesach. He was born on Erev Pesach, Yud Daled Nisan. And the family saw in him greatness. And it's not an accident that they gave him the name Moshe. That this is the next Moshe, born on the day that OUisrael leaves Mitzrayim. And he is in Egypt. I mean, he was then in Spain, but ultimately in Egypt, and he sees himself as a redeemer of sorts. Just as it was said about Moshe Rabbeinu in this week's parsha, that Vayar ki tovhu, they saw he was good when he was born, and Rashi said, Nitmalei habayat ora. Something happened in the house of Rabbeinu Maimon that they understood that something very, very special is going to be in this boy. And they called him Moshe. And Rambam grew up with that responsibility and so on. And you see here in this poem how he's not just phonetically connecting his name Moshe with Moshe Rabbeinu, but there's something about what he is doing here. He's doing Moshe Rabbeinu's work right here. And later on, when in age 35 and he writes the Mishnah Torah, he calls it Mishnah Torah. Why? Who's called Mishnah Torah? Sefer Dvarim that Moshe Rabbeinu writes. He uses the same name. And that's not an accident. And he says, all you have to do is study Tanakh and then study my book and you're all set. And you're all set. In other words, if you bypass the Mishnah and the Gemara, he's not telling you to bypass. But if you do, here, this is a digest of the whole Torah. It's all here on a silver platter. Mishnah Torah. And he sees himself as a type of Noten Torah, almost going over the whole ceremony of Matan Torah from Sinai, and he's now giving the Torah Shebal Peh. And he's also Moshe. He sees himself in this vein. Just Monday, past Monday, I gave a share somewhere else in Yerushalayim in Hebrew, and there was a speaker before me, and he was talking about Parshat Shemot, and he mentioned that the Medrash says that Moshe Rabbeinu had 10 names. Okay, 10 names. And I remembered that one of the names, and he lists them all, one of the nicknames of Moshe Rabbeinu is Avigdor. Avigdor. And it clicked right that second. I said, wow, there's the poet Elazar Kalir, who lives in the 7th century in Eretz Israel, who many of our kinot and slichot were authored by Elazar Kalir, uses Moshe Rabbeinu's name Avigdor when talking about the Melech Yoshiyahu. There's a piyut that we say on Tisha B'Av, Vayikonen Yirmiyahu al Yoshiyahu. There's an elegy that Yirmiyahu gives for the Melech Yoshiyahu. That's a pasuk in Sefer Yirmiyahu, except that the text of the piyut we don't have. We don't have Yirmiyahu's hesped for Yoshiyahu. It just says that Yirmiyahu eulogized Yeshayahu. So Kalir, many years, the king Yoshiyahu, not Yeshayahu, Yoshiyahu. And this was a king who, after many, many years of Avodah Zarah, cleaned up the house. And he was really one of the best kings. So Kalir takes upon himself to write the Hesped. He writes the Hesped as if Yirmiyahu, obviously it's a fictitious Hesped, but if Yirmiyahu would have to write the Hesped, here, I'm giving you a text. This would be Pachot Yoter. It's very similar to what the Rav Zichron Bracha did once with the Hesped that Avraham Avinu gave for Sarah. Lispod l'Sarah v'liv kota. What was the Hesped? The Rav wrote the Hesped. So it's a similar idea that, okay, what would have he said? So what would Yirmiyahu have said? So that's the piyut. And in this piyut, he says, Gam b'chol malchei Yisrael asher kamu likdor, lo kamu kamohu mimot Avigdor. It's a great line. Avigdor means Moshe Rabbeinu here. Gam b'chol malchei Yisrael asher kamu likdor, even the other kings, the previous kings, who try to put up a fence against Avodah Zarah, none was so successful like this one. So how does he say none was so successful like this one? Lo kam kamohu mimot Avigdor. From the days of Moshe Rabbeinu, there was never a king like Yoshiyahu. You know what he's saying? He's saying Mimoshe. He's saying Mimoshe v'ad Yoshiyahu lo kam kamoshe. That's what he's saying. He's using that concept of Mimoshe ad Moshe lo kam kamoshe with regard to Yoshiyahu. He's saying it here. It's the first time I ever saw such an analogy to Moshe Rabbeinu in his nickname Avigdor here. This hit me this Monday, 2 days ago. Gam b'chol malchei Yisrael asher kamu ligdor lo kam kamo mimot Avigdor. But we're talking about the Rambam. And the Rambam has this unbelievable poem and it introduces it. And now we get to Hakdamat Rambam the Mishnah, and it's another poem. So, yeah, Baksha.
I'm sorry, just to take us back to the second line above, Asher him is Kuvitko.
You right?
Right, so I'm just wondering if the original source of this is actually, it's in Malachim Bet, and it talks about you put a pushka in the Bet HaMikdash,
Bedek Habayit, right. Yafeh Meod. Yafeh Meod. Chizuk Bedek Habayit. Yafeh Meod. Yafeh. See, it shows that I'm a product of yeshiva. I brought a Rambam to help me with the phrase, right? It's like, oh yeah, I know that pasuk in Yeshayahu. It's in Sanhedrin, Daf Tzadik Chet, right? Or better, it's a Haftarah. I say it with great embarrassment. Okay, what you have in this poem is two parts, and I'm actually going to get to the second paragraph soon, because the first part is basically he's inviting us to a meal, a spiritual meal. And he's going to use Shir HaShirim and other images of Tanakh, which I put on the page from source number 1 all the way down to source number 15, 16 even, where these sources come from. Let me just run through it. You'll see what I'm talking about. Hitkaptzu chachamim v'imdu alad ametrem. Let's, chachamim, sit down and reading the poem. The Hakdamat HaRambam, the Mishnah. Ki zevet tov azel demetchem. Zevet means a gift. I'm providing you with a gift. And he's saying, please, Chachamim, take heed. I've got something to offer you, a nice gift. Through this, I'm going to teach my students, Banim here, my students, about Yirat Shamayim. Shimu shamoa elai v'ichlu tov. Eat well. Utehi nafshechem kigan ratov. This is going to be a garden that's going to be fertilized garden. It's going to be a lot of good stuff here. Nia isha chafetz chayim ohev yamim l'rot tov. Asher lo he'ela alav melech gadol v'lo shichet tachtav v'lo hishiuhu masiav v'lo hayu mi mapotav. To understand what exactly that meant, where do you have he, she, see, who? So there's an amayim mishis to you, right? That was drawn out of the water. But hanachash he, she, ani va'ochel. This line of Melech Gadol, asher lo he'ela alav Melech Gadol, if you just look at source number 4 from the Gemara Masechet Nidarim, is used by our Chazal to explain that this is the Yetzer Hara. And what the Rambam is saying here, the Yetzer Hara never got the better of me. I beat him. I beat him. He never caused me to go off track, because he could have. Many things in life could have caused me to derail what I'm doing here, but I beat him. I didn't happen. And that's where he says, and then the next part is, Asher lo he'ela alav melech gadol. The melech gadol is the lo yetzer hara. V'lo shichet tachtav, did not undermine me. V'lo hishi'uhu mashi'av. And everything he was trying to pull me away, he didn't succeed. Lo ayu mimapotav. All the things that tried to detract me, it didn't work. Vayasam alibo asher lo yitga'al bepatbag hamelech ubeyayin mishtav. Lifted straight out of the book of Daniel, where Daniel and Mishael and Azariah were invited, basically drafted into the service of the king, and the king wanted to provide them with good food and everything, and he refused to eat the treif food and the treif wine that was being offered to him and so on. And the Rambam is saying, I was offered so many different enticements in life, and I rejected them all. Me and Daniel could shake hands here. There was food, and here it was all kinds of enticements in life to have him derailed. He could have just stayed in medical school and gone to become a nice doctor or a nice lawyer, right? You know, the way the grandmother's rolling the carriage of the twin boys, and they say, what's his name? What their names? Oh, he's the doctor, he's the lawyer. You know, like you try to gear them towards that. The Rambam says, I did not get derailed. Yasur heina el tifchi vel tabachti. Turn to my, what?
Which number is this? Source number?
It's I'm reading the poem.
Oh,
I'm reading the poem. The sources are following one by one, but the Rambam is saying, come into my kitchen. Yasur heina. I'm inviting you into my kitchen. Tabachi means my Beit HaMitbachayim. Come into my kitchen. Tabach. Asher tavachti. I'm the chef. And I'm telling you what I'm putting together here. Ve'el yeini asher yashanti. I've got old wine here. I've got good stuff. I'm offering here good stuff. Ve'el shulchani asher arachti. I've prepared the table. Everything is all in order. I think he wrote this after he finished the book, you know. Lechu lachmu belachmi v'shatu b'yein masachti. Eat from my bread and drink from my wine. V'nei bol kol pri megadim chadashim gam yeshanim. I've got fresh fruits. I've got fruits that are probably like not readily available. V'yein harekach asis rimonim. Dovev siftei yeshenim. So here the Rambam might be playing on a very interesting medrash on Dovev siftei yeshenim, that when you repeat the Torah of previous generations, their lips are moving in the grave. And the Rambam is saying, I'm not saying things for myself. I'm going to be repeating what the greats said in the last 1,000 years, since Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. But what I'm offering now, Trumat Yeni, this is my first, Truma is the first thing you take off from the grain you give to the Kohen. This is my Truma. Whatever I wrote before, books that I wrote, they're inconsequential compared to what I'm offering now. This Sefer is my first major contribution. Trumat Yeni. I'm giving the fruits, the truma of my wine. Reshit kol digani, the first of my grains. Midushtai uben groni. Again, this is poetically playing all my produce. V'yeno mikerem keren ben shemen. The keren ben shemen, my oils are from the finest. V'lachmo lechem abirim. The bread is the bread of knights. Kol ochlei chilko shemen v'tamo kitam l'shad hashamen. It's like man that came from a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Tamo l'shad hashamen is the way the man tasted. And he's saying, my food here is from the table of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. V'hu Pirush HaMishnah, the Mishnah commentary, Asher Shananti Avotechem, our forefathers have learned, Ubiur Hagderot, Asher Gadru Haroim, Minahale Ol Alotechem, which means, and all the strictures that Al Chachamim put up, which means the Dinim de Rabbanan that are found in the Halakha, and that were guided by, again, this pasuk comes from a pasuk, Na'alei Alot, I have it here, where was it? In number 13, Kiroe Edro Yir'eh, Bizro'o Yikabetz Telaim, Ubecheko Yisa, Alot Yinahel, where Yeshayahu is telling Am Yisrael, I'm going to gather you in and give you direction. Alot Minahel means I'm the Manahel, I'm the one who's going to give you direction here. The Ikarei HaYisodot, the fundamentals, Asher Hema Yisodetechem, which are the fundamentals of Yahadut, and of Halacha, and the Minagim, and the Gzerot, and the Takanot, Asher Tiknu Baalei Gvurotechem, the greats, the strong ones. He said it in the poem, I'm Shval Koach, I'm a weakling, but I'm going to bring you the Torah of the ones who are strong. They were really strong. And they were strong from when? Min hayom asher tziva Hashem v'hala l'dorotechem. Back from the Chumash. That's a pasuk in Bamidbar as well. Which means I'm going to teach you everything in this Pirusha Mishnah that you have to know from the days of Moshe Rabbeinu. Ve'hinei hu ki migdal David omed al talaf. It's like a tower of David. Elef hamagen talui alav. There were shields on it. Im kol klei milchamot hagiborim. Here, kol shiltei hagiborim. He's using imagery of war because Chazal speak about the milchamta shel Torah, the battle of Torah, to understand it. And I am prepared with all the weaponry that's necessary. I am fully armed for this task because I, as 23 years old, have mastered the Torah. One second. Let me get to this next point. Who am I? Ani Moshe ben Maimon Hasfaradi. I'm in Spain. Now he writes this, he's left Spain. He left Spain at age 13, fled with his family to Morocco. And he's in Fez, Morocco. From Fez, he takes the local, the nonstop from Marrakesh, from Morocco to Tel Aviv, didn't fly yet, right? El Al wasn't flying that day. So he's taking a local, a boat that's going to go on the North African coast. And he's going to end up here and there and there, but he ends up in Eretz Yisrael at the end of this journey. And he's there for a half a year, and then comes back to Alexandria, and then from Alexandria, by donkey or wagon or whatever, makes his way to Old Cairo, which is Fostat, Old Cairo, in the area of Cairo today. So those are his travels from age 13 to age 30. Now, if he starts writing this at age 23, where is he? He's on the boat. Partially on the ground, because there was no nonstop, so they would, dock here and get off, dock here and get off. Maybe in Kairouan in Tunisia, where there was even a yeshiva. He may have been there for a short while. But he writes that part of this sefer is written on the boat. Now, he didn't have a laptop. He didn't have the disk-on key to put in Project Hashut of Bar Ilan University. What svarim do you think he had? None. He's writing from his head. I mean, this is unbelievable. This is unbelievable. And it's not an accident that when he gets to Mitzrayim and his access to so many different sources, he changes his mind on many, many different things based on what he himself thought, I didn't get it right, or I want to change it, and so on. And he has access now to manuscripts of Gemara that came from the East, which means it came from the yeshivot of Baghdad, the yeshivot of the post-Amoraim, the Geonim. He says it in the Mishneh Torah. I've got 2 manuscripts I'm holding that are 500 years old. He says it. And if you want to check me out, it's in Ilchot Malveh V'Loveh, Perek Ted Vav, okay? It's there. And he's telling me I have 2 manuscripts that are 500 years old. And on the basis of that, I'm telling you what the halacha is against what others thought. And he was so careful in Mitzrayim to triple check things that he wrote. And he went back to his Mishnah commentary and he makes adjustments. He made literary, stylistic adjustments, halachic adjustments, explanation adjustments, many adjustments. But now he says, who am I? I come from Spain. I built this, binitihu. I built this whole structure called the Perush Mishnah. Umiyama Talmud bishitihu. I've drawn it out of the sea of the Talmud, both the Talmud Bavli and Talmud Yerushalmi. This is the word of Moshe Rabbeinu, Mishitihu, right? Drew it out. Umisapir hatosefta yisadatihu. Sapir, we're now going to talk about different beautiful stones and jewelry and ornaments, and he's referring to all his sources. I used the Talmudim, the Gemarot. I used the Tosefta. Ubepuch safra ribatztihu. Also different fine jewelry. The safra Tosefta is the addendum to the Mishnah that was put out after the Mishnah, and it's extra material, auxiliary material to the Mishnah called the Tosefta. Yes, we have it. And the safra is the Medrash Halacha on Sefer Vayikra, umizahav sifri titachtihu. That's the Midrash Halacha on Bamidbar and Devarim. Ubidivrei hageonim semachtihu. I counted on, I relied on the words of the Geonim. Ukikesef hatzaruf zikaktihu, and I refined it, I polished it like silver polish. Uma'aber libi yitzaktihu, and my own mind is also a source. Now I know where the Rav got this from. We had this guy from a different yeshiva, not from YU, sat in the shir, and the Rav said a big novel idea, and the guy raises his hand, he says, what's the Rav's source? And the Rav said, a glatta cup, a straight head. That's a source also. That's also a source. And here the Rambam is saying, after all the sources, I have the Gemara, and I have the Tosefta, and I have the Safra, and I have the Sifri, and I have the Geonim, and I also have myself. I have myself. V'hinehu kekerem chemda. It's just a wonderful vineyard. V'neta shashuim nitatiu. V'yomei v'layle nirbatztiu. Day and night I'm planting here. I'm working on this. Ulirigaim hishkitiu. And every moment I gave thought to this. Ad asher nitzanav gmalo. Sof. I see the fruits coming out. Eshkelotav bashelu, it's now ripening. V'chol asmadar patach. These are phrases straight out of Shir Hashirim. V'chol eitzbo poreach. V'chol adudaim notnu reach. And his fragrance and his fruits. Patachti et sharav v'lo na'altiv. I've opened the doors of halacha and I have not shut them. The yom v'layla lo sagaruhu. L'chol yashar v'navar shematetuhu. Everything is clearly straight and guided. Umincha el hatalmidim shlachtiu, and I'm sending this as a mincha, as a gift to my students. Hineni asartihu al kol asher milin ma'atik liyoshvim lifnei Hashem yiyeh le'echol l'sav'a u'lemichsei atik. It's a pasuk straight out of Yeshayahu Navi, saying that in the third Beit HaMikdash, everything is going to be on the table, readied, and this is what I'm offering to you. What do you think the Rambam thought of himself?
I was going to say his parents instilled such self-confidence.
Yafeh. His parents did a good job with instilling self-confidence, right? So does this mean he's a shachtzan? Shachtzan means he just show off, arrogant. Is that what he's saying here?
No.
The Rav taught us that what it says about Moshe Rabbeinu, Vayish Moshe anav mikol ha'adam asher al pnei adama. That doesn't mean Moshe Rabbeinu, who was the greatest, humblest person, doesn't mean he thought of himself as a piece of nothing. Because if you are great and think of yourself as a piece of nothing, you are totally irresponsible. Because there are going to be challenges in life that HaKadosh Baruch Hu granted you the ability, the talents, and to function and perform, and you're just stepping aside and letting somebody else do it. That is irresponsible. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you things to do, to work with. And the Rav explained once that the Yetzer Hara are those drives that unfortunately can drive a person off the road, but if you galvanize those drives properly, they're going to add up to your personality and to your responsibility. And the Rav once said, Moshe Rabbeinu knew who Moshe Rabbeinu was. He knew exactly who he was. And Rabbi Akiva knew who Rabbi Akiva was. And the Rambam knew who the Rambam was. And I know who I am. That was the end of that sentence, by the way. The Rav's self-evaluation was who the Rav was. He knew how great he was. The Rambam knew exactly how great he was. And because of that, he assumed the responsibility of doing something that he felt Klal Yisrael urgently needed, and that HaKadosh Baruch Hu put him into that position with his abilities, with his acquired knowledge, with his literary talents, and his ability to impact on people, and he goes for it, and he goes for it, and he says, and I've done my job. I've done my job. And this is just the first book that he's writing. And the Mishnah Torah ultimately outclasses the Pirush HaMishnah. So whatever you think about the Rambam in his Mishnah commentary, he himself outclasses himself in the subsequent book, the Mishnah Torah. Get an idea of who Am Yisrael lost on the 20th of Tevet in the year 1204. Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon. Very special, no? Very special?
Did the others all write about themselves, all these great people that you mentioned?
Not
Have
always.
something like this?
Not always. Not always. Rav Moshe Feinstein took the other line. Rav Moshe Feinstein writes in this first volume of Igrot Moshe, he says, I'm not a posek. I mean, this is like the understatement of the millennia, right? Rav Moshe Feinstein is saying, I'm not a posek. A posek? Tam Sofer, the Nodab Yehuda, Rabbi Kiva Eger. I mean, I will poskim. I'm Moshe Feinstein, listen. And he used to sign, HaKatan, I'm Moshe Feinstein. Nobody. But he says there's an interesting halacha. If somebody sees you as an authority and asks you a question, you have an obligation to give the person an answer. Now, if you don't know the answer, you don't tell the person, all right, go to somebody else. No. The halacha is you have to go do the legwork. If you have to look it up, talk to somebody, inquire, whatever, it's your responsibility to get the answer to that person because the person saw you as the Torah authority. So Rabbi Moshe says, it's my fault that 10,000 people saw me. That's your question. That's what he writes. It sounds very funny. And his name was Moshe also. Right. So there, Rabbi Moshe takes the more obviously humble, he's not writing how great he is at all. I mean, today that's not, Maksha.
Who wanted to take Jewish law to recognize that the Rambam was the Rambam?
When the Rambam was alive, they knew it already. They were already copying his book. The Rambam's book of 14 books, he issues it after a halfway mark, the 50-yard line. When people are knocking on the door, they hear that he's writing this, and he's doing it in order, and he allows copyists to copy the first 7 books already. That absolutely causes problems for him later when he makes changes in it and people don't have the changes. Okay, but it shows that the Rambam was already the Rambam when he was still alive.
Not when he was 23.
So 23, not yet. But when he's 35, 40, when he's 40 years old, they know who he is already. They know who he is.
How old was he when
He
he died?
dies, that's a machloket. In the end of the Mishnah Torah, of the Pirush HaMishnah he writes that I'm writing this now, I'm finishing it, and I'm 30 years. I started when I was 23, and now I'm 30 years old. Now, we know he dies in 1204. We also know that he gives a date of when he finishes the Mishnah commentary, and it's 1168. Take 30 years before that, it's 1138. Except that in most old history books, it says the Rambam was born in 1135. So there's a little bit of a contention here. But today, it's pretty much assumed it was 1138. He lived till age 66. Age 66. And he did so much. Okay, we did something in the Rambam.